In the early morning hours of June 16th, 1959, a single shot shattered the silence of a Benedict Canyon home in Los Angeles. The man who had embodied truth, justice, and the American way for millions of television viewers lay dead in his bedroom, a Luger pistol nearby. George Reeves, the 45-year-old actor who had brought Superman to life on the small screen, was gone. The Los Angeles Police Department quickly ruled that he did it himself, but the circumstances surrounding that night have fueled speculation for more than 6 decades. From a weapon with no fingerprints to a fiancé who allegedly predicted his death before it happened, this death remains one of Hollywood's most enduring mysteries. George Reeves was born George Brewer on January 5, 1914, in Woolstock, Iowa. His early life was marked by instability after his parents separated, and he eventually took the surname Reeves from his stepfather. Blessed with rugged good looks and natural charisma, young George set his sights on Hollywood. He made his film debut in 1939 with a small but memorable role in Gone with the Wind, playing one of the Tarleton twins who flirt with Scarlett O'Hara in the opening scene. The role seemed to promise a bright future in motion pictures, and Reeves spent the next decade appearing in a string of films, though none brought him the stardom he craved. After a fairly brief hiatus serving in the Army, he returned to Hollywood hoping for his big break. That break came in 1951 when Reeves was cast in the theatrical film Superman and the Mole Men, which led to the television series Adventures of Superman beginning in 1952. The show became a phenomenon, particularly among children who idolized the square-jawed hero who could fly through the air and stop bullets with his chest. Reeves embraced the role with enthusiasm, making personal appearances at schools and hospitals where young fans could meet their hero in the flesh. Given that he was an idol to so many youngsters, he cleaned up his personal life, quitting smoking so as not to set a bad example. For 6 seasons, he was the face of Superman, and his portrayal became so iconic that it would define the character for an entire generation. However, success came with a price. Reeves found himself hopelessly typecast, unable to escape the cape and tights that had made him famous. Producers saw only Superman when they looked at him, and serious dramatic roles dried up. A particularly painful blow came when his scenes in the prestigious 1953 film From Here to Eternity were cut because test audiences laughed at seeing Superman in a different context. By the time Adventures of Superman ended in 1958, Reeves was struggling professionally, and according to some accounts, personally. He had begun drinking heavily and was frustrated by his stalled career, worried that he would never be able to break out of his starring role. Nevertheless, he had recently signed on to direct and possibly star in new projects, suggesting that his future was not as bleak as some have claimed. The final night of George Reeves's life began innocuously enough. He and his fiancée, Leonore Lemon, had dinner with friends before returning to his Benedict Canyon home. Around midnight, Reeves went upstairs to bed while Lemon continued entertaining guests downstairs. When additional visitors arrived, the noise apparently disturbed Reeves, who came downstairs irritated and reportedly had words with Lemon before returning to the bedroom. What happened next depends on whose account one believes, but around 1:30 that morning, a shot was heard from upstairs. According to witnesses, Leonore had made a strange comment moments before, telling guests that Reeves was going to shoot himself in a strange and detached way. The remark seemed oddly prophetic, and some investigators would later find it deeply suspicious. When police arrived, they found Reeves unclothed on his bed with a single wound to his right temple. A Luger, the iconic German pistol, lay on the floor between his feet, and a spent shell casing was discovered beneath his body. The scene was quickly deemed to have been caused by him alone, and the case was closed within weeks. But almost immediately, troubling questions emerged. The Luger had no fingerprints on it, which seemed impossible if Reeves had fired it himself. Bruises were found on his head and body that couldn't be easily explained. 2 additional bullet holes were discovered in the bedroom floor, suggesting the gun had been fired on previous occasions, or that the death scene was not what it appeared. Perhaps most damning, the witnesses downstairs had waited between 30 and 45 minutes before calling the police, a delay that has never been satisfactorily explained. The investigation into potential suspects inevitably focused on the complicated romantic life of George Reeves. For nearly 8 years before his death, he had been involved in a passionate affair with Toni Mannix, the wife of Eddie Mannix. He was a powerful MGM executive known throughout Hollywood as a fixer with alleged connections to the mob. Toni had showered Reeves with expensive gifts during their relationship, including helping him purchase the very house where he would perish. When Reeves ended the affair in 1958 to pursue a relationship with the much younger Leonore Lemon, Toni was reportedly devastated and furious. In the months before his death, Reeves complained of receiving harassing phone calls and threats that he attributed to his scorned former lover. The situation became so troublesome that he allegedly considered taking legal action. Some investigators have theorized that Eddie Mannix, despite appearing to tolerate the affair, may have arranged for Reeves to be eliminated, either to avenge his wife's honor or at her request. Others have pointed the finger directly at Toni herself, suggesting she hired someone to off the man who had broken her heart. Neither theory has ever been proven, and the Mannixes were never charged with any crime related to the death. Leonore also drew suspicion. Her peculiar comment predicting the shot, combined with the long delay in calling authorities, struck many observers as highly unusual. Some have speculated that an argument between Lemon and Reeves that night escalated to violence, perhaps accidentally, and that the scene was then staged. Lemon herself gave inconsistent statements to police and later fled to New York, refusing to cooperate with subsequent investigations. She maintained until her own death in 1989 that Reeves had done it himself, but her behavior in the aftermath has never stopped raising eyebrows. The official ruling that Reeves turned the Luger on himself has never been changed, despite multiple attempts to reopen the case. More than 60 years later, the truth about what happened to George Reeves potentially remains locked away. The fingerprint-free Luger, the unexplained bruises, the bizarre behavior of the witnesses, and the tangled web of jealousy and Hollywood power all point to something darker. I keep coming back to the significant delay between the shot and the call to police, because it feels inherently suspicious to me. If a shot erupts in a house full of people, and the explanation is truly straightforward, why does nearly an hour pass before anyone picks up the phone? That window looks like time to talk, to calm nerves, to move objects, to decide what story everyone will tell when authorities arrive. Real panic calls happen immediately. This pause suggests calculation. It suggests people realizing in real time that what just happened couldn't be allowed to stand on its own without some coaching. At midnight on June 29, 2001, Patricia Adkins clocked out from her shift at the Honda plant in Marysville, Ohio, and walked into the darkness of the parking lot. The 29-year-old single mother believed she was about to embark on the romantic adventure of her life, a secret getaway to Canada with the man she loved. Instead, she vanished without a trace. Her car remained in the lot, and the married co-worker she had trusted with her secrets, and nearly all of her savings, would become the prime suspect. More than 2 decades later, Patty Adkins has never been found, and no one has been held accountable for whatever happened to her that night. Patty was born on May 4th, 1972, and raised in the Marysville area. By 29, she had worked her way up to a supervisory position at the massive Honda assembly plant. It was a good job with very solid pay in a community where such opportunities didn't grow on trees. She was a devoted mother to her young daughter and maintained close relationships with her family. Friends described her as warm, trusting, and perhaps a little too willing to see the best in people. That trusting nature would prove to be her undoing when she fell for a coworker who had no intention of giving her the future she dreamed about. His name was Brian Flowers, and he was also a supervisor at the Honda plant. He was married with children, but that didn't stop him from pursuing a secret relationship with Patty that lasted approximately 2 years. Brian convinced Patty to keep their affair hidden from everyone, telling her that he needed time to leave his wife, and that secrecy was essential. Patty believed him completely, so much so that she gave him approximately $90,000 from her savings, money supposedly meant to help them start their new life together. As the summer of 2001 approached, Brian presented Patty with an exciting plan. They would take a romantic trip to Canada over the 4th of July holiday weekend. But to maintain secrecy, Patty would need to hide in the bed of Brian's Ford pickup truck while he drove out of the Honda parking lot. Once safely away, she could climb into the cab and they would head north together. It was an unusual arrangement, but Patty agreed without hesitation. Patty withdrew money from her account and told her family she was going on a trip, though she remained vague about the details. She arranged for her daughter to stay with relatives. On the night of June 29th, Patty finished her shift, said goodbye to co-workers, and headed out to the parking lot where Brian was waiting. She was never seen again. When Patty failed to return home or contact her family over the holiday weekend, concern quickly turned to alarm. Her car was discovered still parked at the Honda plant. Her family reported her missing, and investigators began piecing together the secret life she had been living. They soon learned about the affair with Brian Flowers and the plan to hide in his truck. When confronted, Brian initially denied everything, claiming he barely knew Patty. But evidence and witness accounts told a different story, and he eventually admitted to the affair. Brian insisted that Patty never got into his truck that night. He claimed he went straight home after work. He insisted that he spent the holiday weekend camping with his wife and family, and had no idea what happened to his former lover. His wife backed up his alibi, but investigators found troubling inconsistencies in his story. Shortly after Patty vanished, Brian had taken his truck to a car wash and thoroughly scrubbed the bed. When forensic technicians later examined the vehicle, they discovered a small speck of blood that DNA testing determined was consistent with Patty's genetic profile. That single drop of blood has haunted the case ever since. It suggests that something happened in the bed of that truck, something that Brian Flowers has never adequately explained. Yet despite years of investigation, prosecutors have never felt they had enough to bring charges. Without a body, without witnesses, without a confession, the case against Flowers has remained frustratingly incomplete. He has continued to maintain his innocence and has never been arrested or charged in relation to any offenses. In 2006, Patty Adkins was declared legally dead, though her remains have never been recovered. The Union County Sheriff's Office has periodically renewed appeals and assigned new investigators to the case, though no breakthrough has yet to come. On the morning of September 10, 2017, hotel security at the Crowne Plaza Chicago O'Hare in Rosemont, Illinois, made a grim discovery in a place no one should ever die. The body of 19-year-old Kenika Jenkins lay inside a walk-in freezer in the hotel's kitchen. Her life ended by the cold after she had apparently wandered into the unit and become trapped. Her mother had been at the hotel for hours, pleading with staff to search for her missing daughter, only to be met with delays and indifference. By the time Kenika was found, she had been dead for nearly a day. The official ruling called it an accident, but questions about what really happened that night continue to haunt her family and fuel speculation years later. Born on May 27, 1998, and raised on the west side of Chicago, Kenika was known to friends and family as a vibrant and outgoing person who loved to have fun. The evening of September 8, 2017, began like countless other Friday nights for young people looking to blow off steam. Kenika and a group of friends headed to the Crowne Plaza Hotel near O'Hare Airport, where a party was being held in a room on the 9th floor. The gathering was a typical scene of young adults drinking, socializing, and capturing the night on social media. Kenika was drinking alcohol and had reportedly taken topiramate, a non-recreational anticonvulsant medication that can amplify the effects of the substance. As the night wore on and the drinks flowed, Kenika became increasingly intoxicated. Surveillance footage would later show just how impaired she had become. Sometime in the early morning hours of September 9th, Kenika became separated from her friends. Accounts vary as to exactly how this happened, but the result was that a heavily intoxicated young woman found herself wandering alone through the hallways of a large hotel. Surveillance cameras captured her stumbling through corridors on various floors, clearly disoriented and struggling to walk. She bounced off walls, staggered in circles, and appeared completely unaware of her surroundings. Around 3:20 in the morning, the cameras recorded Kenika entering the hotel's kitchen area. This was a section of the hotel that should have been off limits to guests, particularly at that hour, but apparently no security measures prevented her from wandering in. The kitchen led to a storage area that included a large walk-in freezer used for food storage. At some point, Kenika entered that freezer. The door latched behind her. Whether she pushed through it accidentally, mistaking it for an exit, or stumbled in without understanding where she was, remains unclear. What is certain is that once inside, she couldn't get out. Hours passed before anyone raised the alarm. Around 4:30 in the morning, Kenika's friends realized she was missing and called her mother. Teresa Martin rushed to the hotel, arriving around 5 a.m., and immediately demanded that staff help find her daughter. According to Martin and her attorneys, the hotel was slow to respond and dismissive of her concerns. Staff reportedly told her that her daughter had probably left with someone or would turn up eventually. Martin grew increasingly frantic as the hours ticked by with no sign of Kenika. She begged them to check the security footage and search the premises, but claims her pleas were ignored. It was not until approximately 12:30 a.m. on September 10th, nearly 24 hours after Kenika was last seen on camera, that her body was finally discovered. A hotel security officer conducting a search found her in the walk-in freezer, her body frozen and lifeless. The young woman who had been laughing and partying with friends just hours earlier was gone. The medical examiner would later determine that Kenika died from hypothermia caused by prolonged exposure to the freezing temperatures. Her blood alcohol level was measured at slightly above the legal driving limit, and the presence of topiramate in her system likely compounded her impairment. The official ruling was that Kenika Jenkins died in an accident. According to investigators, she had wandered drunkenly into a restricted area and accidentally trapped herself in the freezer. The Rosemont Police Department closed the case in October 2017, concluding that there was no evidence of foul play. But for Kenika's family and a massive online community that had become invested in the case, the official explanation raised more questions than it answered. Social media exploded with conspiracy theories in the days following Kenika's death. Amateur sleuths pored over every frame of the surveillance footage, claiming to see evidence that she had been followed, attacked, or even dragged into the freezer by unseen assailants. Videos posted by friends who had been at the party were scrutinized for hidden clues. Some theorists accused Kenneca's friends of involvement in her death, pointing to their behavior on social media as suspicious. The hashtag Justice for Kenneca trended nationally as thousands demanded that authorities reopen the investigation and consider the possibility of a slaying. While the conspiracy theories never produced credible evidence, legitimate questions about hotel negligence proved more substantial. Kenneca's family filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the Crowne Plaza, arguing that the hotel had failed in its duty to protect guests. Their attorneys pointed out that the freezer door could latch from the outside, effectively trapping anyone who entered. They argued that security was inadequate, that restricted areas were too easily accessible, and that staff had been negligent in responding to a mother's desperate pleas. The lawsuit painted a picture of a tragedy that could and should have been prevented if some basic measures were in place. In December 2023, more than 6 years after Kenneca's death, the family reached a settlement with the hotel reported to be worth approximately $10 million. The settlement did not include an admission of wrongdoing, but it represented at least some measure of accountability for the failures that contributed to the tragedy. The death of Kenneca Jenkins remains officially classified as an accident, the result of a young woman's impaired judgment leading her into a deadly situation. Ultimately, despite the theories online, there's no credible evidence that anyone harmed her intentionally or forced her into that freezer. However, the question of how a 19-year-old could stumble through a major hotel, clearly in distress, without a single employee noticing or intervening while on camera, remains open. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here with a quick reminder to like and share this video if you're enjoying it and to hit the notification bell. Also, don't forget to check out the Patreon or the YouTube membership to take your support for my channel to the next level. Imagine a dusty storage room in the labyrinthine depths of the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul in the autumn of 1929. A German theologian named Gustav Deissmann is hunched over stacks of neglected manuscripts, cataloging items that have lain forgotten for centuries. The Ottoman Empire has collapsed, the Republic of Turkey is barely 6 years old, and no one is quite sure what treasures lie buried in the old Sultan's palace. Deissmann unfurls a sheet of gazelle skin, yellowed with age and bearing elaborate illustrations in faded ink. He sees coastlines, ships with billowing sails, exotic animals, and inscriptions in Ottoman Turkish. He doesn't yet realize that he is holding a fragment of one of the most controversial maps in human history. He's holding a document that will ignite debates about medieval and ancient knowledge, lost civilizations, and the very nature of discovery itself. The Piri Reis map, as it would come to be known, was created in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral named Muhyiddin Piri, who earned the honorific Reis, meaning admiral. Only about 1/3 of the original world map survives today, showing the Atlantic Ocean, the western coasts of Europe and Africa, and the eastern coastline of the Americas. The surviving fragment measures roughly 90 by 63 centimeters and is painted on gazelle hide in vivid colors that have faded but not disappeared over 5 centuries. What makes this particular document extraordinary isn't merely its age or its beauty, but the claims its creator made about his sources and the mysteries those claims have spawned. Piri Reis was born around 1465 in Gallipoli, a strategic naval town on the Dardanelles that served as a base for Ottoman maritime operations. His education in the arts of the sea began early, and his uncle, Kemal Reis, was one of the most feared corsairs in the Mediterranean. These were privateers who terrorized Spanish, Venetian, and other European shipping while serving the Ottoman Sultan. In essence, They were state-sponsored pirates. The young future admiral joined his uncle's crew at the age of 11 or 12, learning navigation, combat, and cartography in the crucible of actual naval battles. For decades, he sailed the Mediterranean and beyond, accumulating geographical knowledge that few could match. The map itself was completed in the month of Muharram in the Islamic year 919, corresponding to March or April of 1513. Piri Reis presented it to Selim the Grim in 1517 during the Ottoman conquest of Egypt. He was perhaps hoping to demonstrate the strategic value of his geographical expertise to the empire's expanding ambitions. The timing was significant. Columbus had reached the Caribbean only 21 years earlier. Vasco da Gama had rounded the Cape of Good Hope just 15 years before. The great age of European exploration was in its infancy, and yet here was an Ottoman admiral producing a world map of remarkable sophistication. The inscriptions on the map, written in Ottoman Turkish, provide a window into Piri Reis's methodology and his sources. He claimed to have consulted approximately 20 maps in constructing his composite image of the Atlantic world. Among these, he listed 8 Ptolemaic maps from the classical tradition, 4 Portuguese maps, an Arabic map, and a map that he claimed was made by Columbus himself. According to Piri Reis, this Columbus map had been captured from a Spanish sailor during a naval engagement in the Mediterranean in 1501. The sailor had reportedly accompanied Columbus on 3 voyages to the New World and carried a copy of the explorer's own chart. This claim about the Columbus source has fascinated historians for nearly a century. No map made by Columbus is known to survive. The Piri Reis map shows the Caribbean islands with reasonable accuracy, including Cuba, Hispaniola, and the coastline that Columbus would have encountered on his voyages. The depiction isn't perfect, but it is consistent with the fragmentary knowledge that Spanish explorers possessed in the first decade of the 16th century. The shape of the islands, their relative positions, and certain specific details all point toward an early Spanish original. The controversy that has swirled around the Piri Reis map for decades, however, has less to do with Columbus than with the strange landmass depicted at the southern edge. The coastline extends southward from what appears to be South America, curving dramatically toward the east, in a manner that has provoked wild speculation. In 1960, a professor of history at Keene State College in New Hampshire, named Charles Hapgood, made a startling claim. He argued that this southern portion of the map depicted the coastline of Antarctica, and not merely Antarctica as we know it today, but Antarctica as it would appear without its ice sheet. Hapgood published his theory in a book called Maps of the Ancient Sea Kings, proposing that the Piri Reis map preserved geographical knowledge from a lost civilization. The implications of Hapgood's theory were extraordinary. Antarctica was not officially discovered until 1820, more than 3 centuries after Piri Reis created his map. Hapgood's book attracted the attention of fringe theorists, ancient astronaut enthusiasts, and Atlantis believers, who seized upon the map as evidence for their various speculations. The scholarly consensus, however, offers a far more mundane explanation. The southern landmass on the Piri Reis map is almost certainly not Antarctica at all. It's most likely a continuation of the South American coastline, distorted and bent eastward due to the conventions of Portolan chart construction. Portolan charts, the navigational maps used by Mediterranean sailors, typically showed coastlines curving around the edges of the parchment. They weren't designed to represent the spherical Earth on a flat surface with mathematical precision, but rather, they were practical tools for coastal navigation. When Piri Reis compiled his map from multiple sources, he was forced to reconcile different scales, orientations, and projections. Furthermore, the map may reflect the widespread Renaissance belief in a great southern continent, a hypothetical terra australis that appeared on many maps of the period. European cartographers had theorized since ancient times that a massive landmass must exist in the southern hemisphere to balance the known continents of the north. This theoretical continent appeared on maps long before any explorer actually reached Antarctic waters. The southern landmass on the Piri Reis map may simply represent this speculative geography, drawn from sources that were themselves based on theory rather than observation. What remains undeniable is the remarkable achievement that the map represents within its proper historical context. In 1513, the Ottoman Empire was engaged in an intellectual golden age, synthesizing knowledge from Arab, Persian, Greek, and now Renaissance European sources. Piri Reis stood at the intersection of multiple cartographic traditions and was able to synthesize them in a way few others could. He could read Arabic and had access to Islamic geographical texts that preserved classical learning largely still lost to medieval Europe. He also had access through naval combat and Mediterranean commerce to the latest Portuguese and Spanish discoveries. His map represents a moment of extraordinary cultural exchange, when information flowed across hostile borders and religious divides through the universal language of trade and conflict. Piri Reis would go on to produce an even more impressive work called the Book of Navigation in English, completed in 1521 and revised in 1525. This comprehensive atlas of the Mediterranean contained over 200 detailed charts and sailing directions, representing decades of accumulated maritime knowledge. He continued to serve the Ottoman Navy into old age, eventually rising to the rank of Admiral of the Fleet in the Arabian Sea. After an unsuccessful campaign against the Portuguese in the Persian Gulf in 1552, he returned to Egypt, where he was accused of abandoning his fleet. The Ottoman governor of Egypt ordered him beheaded, and the great cartographer died in disgrace, and his world map was rolled up and forgotten in a palace storeroom. In the turbulent years of early 20th century China, one of the era's most radical voices vanished. He Yin-jen, a pioneering anarchist and champion of women's liberation, disappeared from the historical record around 1920, leaving behind unanswered questions about her fate. For a woman who challenged tradition and advocated a complete social revolution, the end of her story remains an enduring enigma to this day. She was born Heban and emerged as a formidable voice for change during the last years of the Qing dynasty. She came from a prosperous family in Jiangsu, and unusually for a girl of her time, received a solid education in the Confucian classics. In 1903, she married Liu Shipei, a noted scholar and fellow revolutionary, moving with him to Shanghai to study at a progressive women's academy. Around this time, she adopted the pen name Heyin Zhen, deliberately including her mother's surname in defiance of traditional naming customs. From early on, Heiyin's outlook set her apart from other reformers. Many Chinese intellectuals saw women's emancipation mainly as a means to strengthen the nation. Heiyin argued that freeing women was a moral end in itself, not just a tool for national progress. She insisted that the oppression of women was entwined with imperialism, capitalism, and class hierarchy, issues far beyond China's domestic concerns. This broad vision made her a central and controversial figure in China's nascent feminist movement. By 1907, mounting political pressure forced Heiyin and her husband to flee China for exile in Tokyo. There, among Chinese exiles and student dissidents, she came into her own as an anarchist feminist leader. That same year, Heiyin co-founded the Society for the Restoration of Women's Rights and its journal Natural Justice as vehicles for her radical ideas. She demanded the overthrow of entrenched male privilege in Chinese society. Her organization advocated using force to topple women's oppressors and urged resistance against the ruling class and capitalist exploitation. In her writings, He Yin dissected how women were subjugated not only by Confucian tradition, but also by economic exploitation and state power. She observed with frustration that for centuries, women had been treated as playthings, and even in modern society, they were regarded as mere tools to serve men's ends. Writing under various pen names, she published fiery essays in these journals, though later many of her articles were mistakenly credited to her husband, obscuring her contributions. He Yin's philosophy was revolutionary in every sense. She didn't believe that modest reforms like women's voting rights would suffice under an oppressive system. Instead, she held that only a complete social upheaval, dismantling class exploitation, capitalism, and government power, could achieve genuine gender equality. He Yin effectively decoupled feminism from narrow nationalism by insisting that women's freedom must be pursued for its own sake, rather than as a means to strengthen China. These uncompromising views alarmed authorities, who saw her as a dangerous radical. In 1908, He Yin and Liu had a bitter falling out with some of their revolutionary comrades amid accusations of colluding with the regime of the Qing Empire. By 1909, the couple returned to China and, in an ironic twist, went to work for the very Manchu government they had once opposed. After the Qing dynasty fell in 1911, Liu aligned himself with the new Republican regime and obtained a university post in Beijing. During these years, He Yin largely retreated from public life. Ostracized by former allies and likely disillusioned, the once fiery activist now lived quietly in the shadows, her days of revolutionary pamphleteering seemingly behind her. In 1919, tragically, Liu Shipei died of tuberculosis, leaving He Yin widowed at 35. Rumors soon arose about her fate, but none could be confirmed. One story claimed that grief drove her to become a Buddhist, where she adopted a new name and faded from history. Another held that she succumbed to a broken heart or mental collapse and died not long after. Either way, by around 1920, He Yin had vanished from public view. No reliable record of her life after that point exists. For decades after she disappeared, He Yin's contributions were almost lost to history. In a historical irony, her writings continued to be misattributed to male colleagues, particularly her husband, further obscuring her legacy. However, despite nearly a century of obscurity, scholars today recognize He Yin as a central figure in the birth of Chinese feminism. In the end, we may never learn whether she spent her final years in obscurity in a Buddhist monastery, or whether she perished soon after her husband. On a brutally cold November morning in 1985, a highway worker pulled into Montana's isolated Bad Route Rest area in Dawson County and made a gruesome discovery. There was a car parked there fully engulfed in flames with no one inside. The vehicle belonged to 67-year-old Dexter Stefanik of Wisconsin, who had been on a long drive home. This startling scene was the first hint of a mystery that would confound investigators for decades. Dexter was a retired widower from Rhinelander, Wisconsin. In November 1985, after visiting his son's family in Oregon, following his wife's death the year before, he decided it was time to drive back to Wisconsin alone. He set out on November 18th in his brown Plymouth Horizon and, to save money, planned to sleep at rest stops instead of motels during the 2,000-mile journey. The next morning, Dexter's car was found engulfed in flames at the Bad Route Rest area off Interstate 94. A highway worker who spotted the blaze alerted authorities, and the smoldering wreck was soon identified by its Wisconsin plates as Dexter's vehicle. There was no trace of Dexter himself. At first, there was no obvious evidence of a crime. With no body present, officials assumed it might simply be a stalled car and a missing driver. The incident was treated as a missing person case. Perhaps the driver had wandered away in the freezing -40 weather and hitched a ride after a breakdown. However, evidence at the scene quickly pointed to foul play. An arson investigator concluded the fire was deliberately set with gasoline, especially soaking the car's back seat. Furthermore, the driver's seat was found pushed all the way back, an odd position given Dexter's short stature, and this suggested someone much taller had been behind the wheel. Investigators began retracing events at the rest area that morning. They learned that earlier on November 19th, the rest stop's custodian and a highway maintenance supervisor had noticed an unattended white Chevy Blazer with Arizona plates parked there. The truck sported a distinctive blue stripe and a cattle guard front bumper, and it appeared someone might have been living out of it since clothes and bedding were visible inside. Around 9:30 a.m., not long before the fire was reported, the custodian encountered a tall, clean-shaven man, about 6 feet in height, driving Dexter's car. The stranger was carrying a couple of gasoline cans. When asked if he needed help, the man calmly explained that he had run out of gas and had fetched fuel, nothing unusual on the surface. By the time the burning car was discovered, this unknown man and the white Chevy truck had vanished. The implication was chilling. Hours into his trip, Dexter likely crossed paths with this individual at the deserted rest stop. But for months, Dexter's fate remained unknown, and the case stalled out quickly. Then, on March 8, 1986, a local couple dumping garbage at a remote landfill about 17 miles from the rest area stumbled upon disturbing evidence. They found a wallet with Dexter's ID lying on the ground, and nearby spotted personal items that hadn't been there on earlier visits, including a suitcase, clothing, and a shaving kit. Searching further, they made a horrific find. A human body partially buried under an old mattress, with a booted foot protruding from underneath. Authorities were called, and dental records confirmed the body to be Dexter Stefanik. The autopsy revealed he had been beaten and then shot twice in the back of the head. Despite the violence of the crime, some of Dexter's valuables were untouched. Cash was still in his suitcase, making robbery an unlikely motive. Investigators also noted a curious detail. Although Dexter's body had lain in the landfill for months, his clothing and luggage seemed to have been dropped off only recently. This strongly suggested that the perpetrator had returned to the dump site to dispose of evidence long after the slaying. Back at the Bad Root rest stop, detectives uncovered one last eerie clue. Scrawled in pencil on a wall inside the men's restroom was a line of graffiti that appeared to reference the crime. It read, "Hot Jock Shot from Wisconsin, 1185, followed by the statement, Saturday the 3rd. The words were too specific to ignore. Investigators believed the perpetrator left this cryptic message as a taunt. They also believed he was possibly using Hot Jock to refer to himself, and that it may have been his CB radio handle. The timing was also strange, since the writing was noticed only after Dexter's body was found months later. Whether genuine or a bizarre coincidence, the graffiti reinforced the sense that the perpetrator was brazenly bragging about the crime. Despite these clues, the investigation struggled to make headway. Detectives chased down countless leads trying to identify the tall stranger and his white truck. Under hypnosis, one witness recalled that the truck's Arizona license plate began with the numbers 147, which allowed police to narrow down a list of possible owners. Unfortunately, none of those leads panned out. Extensive interviews with people in Dexter's life also led nowhere, and he was well liked and had no known enemies. With no arrests and few answers, The case eventually went cold once again. Investigators also feared that the unidentified predator, having gotten away, might strike again at another lonely rest stop. Even a televised segment on Unsolved Mysteries in 1989 failed to generate any useful tips, and as usual, I have to specify what a huge phenomenon this show was at the time. On broadcasts and rebroadcasts, Unsolved Mysteries would be seen by tens of millions of households across the United States and Canada. In January 2024, nearly 39 years after Dexter's death, the Dawson County Sheriff's Office finally named a long-suspected perpetrator. They announced that Charles Sullivan, a 79-year-old man serving prison time in Nevada, was believed to likely have slain Dexter Stefanik. Sullivan had a violent past, and he was convicted of a 1979 slaying, but had been let out early, and crucially, he fit the profile from 1985. He would have been in his late 30s at the time, the same age range as the mystery man, and drove a vehicle similar to the described Blazer. In terms of appearance, he was tall, the sort of man who would have had to push a seat all the way back to drive comfortably. Investigators say Sullivan's movements and appearance line up with the witness statements. He was even suspected in other unsolved slayings across the western states, suggesting Dexter may have fallen victim to a serial predator traveling the highways. However, because no physical evidence links him conclusively to Dexter's case, prosecutors have decided to exercise extreme caution. When questioned by detectives about Dexter's slaying, Sullivan invoked his right to remain silent. Lacking definitive evidence and wanting to keep the option open in case things change, they effectively closed the case with the belief that Sullivan is the one responsible. Sullivan currently remains behind bars, where he will stay for the rest of his natural life. Vladimir Sabic came into the world on January 10, 1945 in Sacramento, California, born prematurely to a family of Croatian descent. His father, a California Highway Patrol officer and former bomber pilot, took one look at the infant's spindly arms and legs and gave him a nickname that would stick for life: Spider. It was the kind of name that seemed almost prophetic, because Spider Sabic would grow up to move across snow with an agility and grace that few could match. What no one knew at the time is that his death would go on to be one of the most disturbing unsolved mysteries in American sports history. The Sabic family lived in Keyburz, a remote mountain town near Lake Tahoe, where Spider attended a one-room schoolhouse and learned to ski almost before he could walk. Their local hill was Edelweiss, a modest ski area along Highway 50, where a German émigré coach named Lutz Eineder taught Spider European-style racing technique. Spider and his brother Steve became junior standouts, part of a scrappy group of local racers. After Sunday Mass at the little Catholic church across the highway from the ski area, Spider and Steve would strap on their skis and head straight for the slopes. It was an idyllic, almost storybook upbringing, and it laid the foundation for everything that followed. Spider's talent earned him a ski scholarship to the University of Colorado, where he came under the mentorship of legendary coach Bob Beatty. By the mid-1960s, he joined the U.S. ski team, and in 1968, at just 22 years old, he competed at the Winter Olympics in Grenoble, France. He finished fifth in the slalom, matching fellow American Billy Kidd's giant slalom result as the best U.S. performance at those games. 2 months later, he won a World Cup slalom at Heavenly Valley, just 30 miles from his hometown. He went on to rack up multiple podium finishes and 18 top 10 results across his World Cup career, establishing himself as one of America's premier ski racers. Spider wasn't content with the constraints of amateur competition. In 1971, he left the World Cup circuit to join the fledgling World Pro Ski Tour, founded by his mentor Bob Beatty. The tour featured a thrilling head-to-head elimination format with courses that included jumps amid the gates, making it far more telegenic than traditional racing. Spider thrived in this new arena, winning the overall professional championship in both 1971 and 1972. His good looks and magnetic personality made him the perfect face for the sport's expansion into mainstream culture. The prize money was modest. Spider earned just over $21,000 as champion in 1971, but endorsements pushed his annual income well over $100,000, serious money for a professional athlete at the time. He moved to Aspen, building a chalet in the exclusive gated community of Starwood, near the home of singer John Denver. He even earned his pilot's license and flew his own twin-engine plane to racing events, further enhancing his public profile and his celebrity status. An injury in 1973 limited his performance on the slopes, but at the same time his public profile just continued to rise. In 1974, he appeared on the cover of GQ magazine. Spider Sabich wasn't just a ski racer anymore. He was a celebrity living a life that seemed impossibly glamorous. At a celebrity ski race in Bear Valley, California in 1972, Spider met Claudine Longet, a French-born singer and actress who was the estranged wife of entertainer Andy Williams. The attraction between them was immediate and intense. Before long, Spider had moved Longet and her 3 children into his home, and they became one of Aspen's most visible couples. But the relationship was far from smooth. Friends later said the couple argued frequently and that Longet could be intensely jealous. There were reports she'd thrown a wine glass at Spider's head during one argument and tried to prevent him from attending social events. By 1975, Longet was reportedly looking into building a separate house so the couple could live apart. People close to Spider said he'd been talking about ending the relationship. He was accustomed to a freewheeling bachelor lifestyle, and living with Longet and her children had begun to feel like a constraint. On the afternoon of Sunday, March 21, 1976, Spider returned to his home after a training session at Aspen Highlands and a subsequent dinner visit with Bob Beatty, his mentor. He stripped down to his thermal underwear and headed into the bathroom to shower. What happened next has been debated for nearly 5 decades. For reasons that remain unclear and disputed, Claudine Longet entered the bathroom carrying an imitation Luger. A single shot struck Spider in the abdomen, piercing his pancreas and stomach and severing a major artery. He lost a catastrophic amount of blood before an ambulance arrived. Spider died en route to Aspen Valley Hospital, with Longet at his side. He was 31 years old. Longet told police the shooting was an accident, claiming she'd picked up the weapon and asked Spider to show her how it worked. Police had immediate doubts. An autopsy indicated that when the Luger was fired, Spider had been bent over and facing away from Claudine, and had been at least 6 feet from her. That positioning didn't align with someone demonstrating a weapon to the person holding it. Additionally, ballistics testing showed that the trigger had likely been pulled more than once, indicating that something went wrong on the first pull. Detectives were also highly skeptical that this so-called demonstration was done inside the house rather than outside. Longet was charged with reckless manslaughter on April 8, 1976. The trial, held in January 1977, became a media spectacle that transformed sleepy Aspen into a circus. Andy Williams flew in to support his ex-wife, sat beside her throughout proceedings, and paid for her legal defense. More than 300 prospective jurors were placed on standby before a final panel was seated. This reflected the fact that both Claudine and Spider were so well known, both in the community and nationally. The prosecution's case was severely hampered by procedural errors. Officers had taken a blood sample from Longet without a warrant. That sample reportedly showed significant amounts of Colombian confetti flowing through her bloodstream. They'd also seized her personal diary without proper authorization or any sort of warrant. Prosecutors said the diary contradicted her claim that the relationship was stable, a fact which could have significantly undermined her defense. Both the blood results and the diary were ruled inadmissible, stripping the prosecution of potentially devastating evidence. With this evidence put aside, the district attorney built his remaining case around the autopsy report, arguing that the physical evidence made an accidental shooting nearly impossible. The defense countered that the weapon was faulty and unreliable and had been a cheap imitation of a real Luger. After 4 days of testimony, the jury deliberated roughly 4 hours before returning a verdict. They convicted Longet not of the sought-after felony, but of misdemeanor criminal negligence. She was sentenced to 30 days in jail, and to top it all off, she was hit with a $25 fine. And no, you don't have to rewind there. You heard me correctly. The fine was $25. The sentence outraged the Savage family and much of the American public, and the manner in which it was carried out bothered people even more. Claudine was allowed to choose when to serve her 30 days, and opted to do most of it on weekends, while her kids were away with their famous dad. Public anger intensified when she was spotted vacationing with her defense attorney, Ron Austin, shortly afterward. She married Austin in 1985, and the couple lived in Aspen for decades before eventually relocating to Hawaii. The Savage family filed a wrongful death lawsuit, ultimately settling out of court with a confidentiality agreement that barred Longet from publicly discussing the case. Spider's brother Steve later offered a blunt assessment, saying that Claudine had accomplished only 2 things in her life: marrying Andy Williams and getting away with it. For an event that has been virtually forgotten in the present day, the cultural fallout was considerable. Saturday Night Live aired a sketch in its first season featuring a mock ski shooting competition named after Longet, in which skiers were picked off mid-run. The Rolling Stones recorded a song called Claudine for a 1978 album, which very strongly implies that Claudine got away with slaying Spider. And in case you tuned in to watch for music recommendations, I listened to the song and I have to say, I can see why it's not well known, but your mileage may vary, of course. Spider Savage was inducted posthumously into the U.S. Ski and Snowboard Hall of Fame in 2022, 46 years after his death. Claudine Longet is still married to her former defense lawyer, and at this point, even if she admitted that she slew Spider intentionally, she couldn't be prosecuted again due to double jeopardy. On the evening of February 11, 1976, a man calling himself Joseph Donati stepped out of a friend's apartment in San Francisco's quiet outer Sunset neighborhood. He walked toward his parked car near the corner of 25th Avenue and Moraga Street, fishing for his keys. It was an ordinary scene on an ordinary block of squat pastel row houses. Then a white van screeched around the corner, and blasts shattered the stillness. 4 rounds struck the man at nearly point-blank range. He was dead before he hit the pavement. Though he carried a loaded revolver in his jacket, he never had a chance to reach for it. When police arrived, they quickly discovered that while Joseph Donati officially existed, this was a well-established alias. The dead man was Joseph Barboza, one of the most feared hitmen in American organized crime, and the first person to die after entering the Federal Witness Protection Program. To understand how Barboza ended up bleeding out on a San Francisco sidewalk, we've got to go back to the beginning. He was born on September 20th, 1932, in New Bedford, Massachusetts, to Portuguese immigrant parents. His father was a middleweight boxer who eventually abandoned the family, leaving Barboza's mother, a seamstress, to raise 4 children alone. That departure when Joe was around 12 seemed to light a fuse that never went out. Joe was getting arrested before he'd finished his teenage years and was shipped off to the Lyman School for Boys, a so-called reform institution that served as a finishing school for criminals. By 18, he'd been sentenced to 5 years at the Massachusetts Correctional Institution in Concord. While there, he led a wild prison break in 1953. He and 6 other inmates overpowered 4 guards and fled in stolen cars, only to be recaptured within 24 hours. Like his father, Barboza tried boxing, fighting as a light heavyweight under the name The Baron. He won 8 of roughly 11 professional bouts, 5 by knockout, but legitimate athletics couldn't contain his appetite for violence. He drifted between jobs as a longshoreman and a fruit store clerk, always circling back to crime. After his parole in 1958, he became a fixture in East Boston's underworld, holding court at a bar on Bennington Street that locals called Barboza's Corner. The nickname that would follow Barboza to his grave originated during an incident at a nightclub frequented by Patriarca crime family members. When an older patron complained about Barboza's behavior, Barboza slapped the man across the face. Patriarca underboss Henry Tamaleo, seated nearby, angrily ordered Barboza never to touch anyone with his hands again. Without missing a beat, Barboza leaned over and bit the man's ear. Some accounts say he chewed off a piece of the man's cheek. Either way, he was now known as the Animal. Despite his Portuguese heritage, Barboza rose to become one of the most prolific hitmen for Raymond Patriarca's New England crime family during the 1960s. He's believed to have slain as many as 26 people, though that number has never been verified. However, he needed a way to generate income between big hits, and given his close ties with the Patriarca crime family, he had free rein to conduct his business. His crew operated across Boston, generating substantial income through loan sharking and generalized intimidation. However, by 1966, Barboza's position had become dangerously unstable. He'd been shot at outside his Chelsea home and wasn't following the traditional rules of the mob. He tried shaking down a nightclub already paying protection to the Patriarca underboss in Boston. That recklessness made him a target from all sides. While it was never confirmed with certainty that a contract was put out on him by his own people, he certainly believed this was the case. Everything changed in 1967 when Barboza was jailed on federal weapons charges. Federal agents reinforced the idea that he had a contract on his head and that his former friends had turned foe. Given that he wasn't safe on the streets or in prison, the agents convinced him that it was time to turn on everyone he worked for, and in exchange, he could enter witness protection. And just to be clear here, by turn on the other mob guys, I mean testify against them, in case anyone was wondering about my phrasing there. He testified against Raymond Patriarca himself, helping secure an indictment for conspiracy to eliminate bookies in New England. But the most consequential and ultimately most damaging chapter of Barboza's cooperation involved the 1965 slaying of small-time criminal Teddy Deegan. Barboza took the stand and named 6 men as participants in Deegan's hit. After 50 days of testimony, the jury convicted all 6. 4 received death sentences, and 2 others got life in prison. The problem was that at least 4 of those men were completely innocent. Barboza had lied under oath, implicating them based on personal grudges and at the encouragement of his handlers. The actual perpetrators included Barboza himself and Vincent Flemmi, who happened to be a valuable informant the FBI wanted to protect. Interestingly, the wrongly accused men spent a combined total of over 100 years in prison, with the state government eventually paying out over $100 million to their families. But that wouldn't come out until long after Barboza's death, and for the time being, he had fulfilled his end of the bargain. After his testimony, Barboza was relocated to Santa Rosa, California, under a new identity. The government enrolled him in culinary school, leveraging his genuine talent as a cook who specialized in Portuguese delicacies. But Barboza couldn't stay out of trouble. In the summer of 1970, he eliminated a small-time criminal named Clay Wilson during a dispute over stolen goods. He shot Wilson while the two were out walking with two women, then hid the body under a tree stump. When arrested, Barboza essentially blackmailed the government by threatening to recant his Boston testimony. He told the local detectives that he was actually in witness protection and that he had made up large parts of the story that took a bite out of the New England mob. But then he also told them that he had implicated people based on who the FBI told him to target, prompting FBI agents to rush to California and serve as character witnesses at his trial. With numerous federal agents willing to stake their careers on what a great guy Barboza really was, and with potential federal pressure, he was offered a sweetheart deal. Ultimately, Barboza was sentenced to 5 years at Folsom Prison, where he wrote poetry about the mob and about his crimes. He was paroled in October 1975 and given yet another identity, this time as Joseph Donati. He moved into a cheap apartment near Ocean Beach in San Francisco and got a job as a cook at a restaurant near City Hall. The FBI maintained loose surveillance, but Barboza had essentially stopped hiding, and he just couldn't stay away from illicit activities. He harbored ambitions of filling what he perceived as a leadership void in San Francisco's organized crime scene. That ambition led him to reconnect with James Chalmers, a small-time South Boston hoodlum. The two met regularly to discuss criminal schemes. What Barboza didn't know was that Chalmers was working a criminal scheme already, and Barboza wasn't to be a partner, but the target. He was actively betraying him, confirming all details before tipping off members of the New England Mafia about his location. While it's never been confirmed with any absolute certainty, federal agents later caught members of the Mafia talk about what happened to Barboza. According to these recordings, they dispatched 2 top-level enforcers to San Francisco to handle the matter personally. If the recordings are to be believed, the Mafia thought this was so important that they had 2 made men complete the hit themselves. According to the recordings, they watched and waited, since everything had to be perfect, as they knew that they would only get 1 shot. On that February evening, as Barboza left Chalmers' apartment and approached his car, a white van rolled up fast, and shots fired, cutting him down. Barboza was 43 years old. Interestingly, in a statement given by Barboza's attorney about the slaying, he said that society had suffered no great loss, a remarkably candid statement. Despite the recordings, no one was ever charged in relation to his death, and some conspiracy-minded individuals have speculated that the FBI essentially let it happen. Some have speculated that no one was ever prosecuted for the crime, despite the evidence, because it would have exposed the unethical activities of the agents assigned to his case. Not only that, the prosecution may have caused all the convictions against members of the New England Mafia to fall apart, leading to numerous organized crime figures being released. Though there's no direct proof of this, he was a man that held tremendous ability to personally blackmail numerous agents who had worked on his case. Joseph Barboza left behind a deeply troubling legacy. He was a vicious predator who terrorized New England's underworld for the better part of a decade. He was also a cooperating witness whose perjured testimony destroyed the lives of innocent men and their families for over 3 decades. And he was, in many ways, a pawn of an FBI willing to sacrifice justice in its conflict against organized crime. Christine Lindsay Walters was 23 years old in the fall of 2008, and by all accounts, she embraced life with open arms. Born on August 8, 1985, and raised in Deerfield, Wisconsin, she'd grown into a warm, curious, and independent young woman. She was a junior at the University of Wisconsin at Stevens Point, studying botany and ethnobotany. Outside coursework, she worked on an organic farm near campus, taught yoga and Pilates classes, and radiated the kind of energy that drew people to her. In July 2008, Christine traveled to Portland, Oregon to visit friends during summer break. She'd planned to stay 3 weeks and return for the fall semester, but the West Coast captivated her. She fell in love with the closeness to nature, the freedom, and the alternative communities that seemed to share her values. She extended her stay, eventually connecting with self-described spiritual environmentalists, and before long, she'd made her way south to Humboldt County in California. This was a decision that would change everything as she became fully entangled in this region that has a rather sinister reputation. Humboldt County sits along the northern California coast, roughly 300 miles north of San Francisco. It's a region of towering redwood forests, rugged coastline, and small towns like Eureka and Arcata that have long attracted artists, students, and people seeking a simpler life. But Humboldt also forms part of the Emerald Triangle, a 3-county area encompassing Humboldt, Trinity, and Mendocino. This has historically been by far the largest weed-producing region in the country, and beneath the natural beauty and counterculture charm, there's a darker reality. The region has an unusually high rate of missing persons, and law enforcement resources are stretched thin across vast, densely forested terrain that can swallow people whole. Some locals and online sleuths have taken to calling the area the Black Hole for exactly that reason. Christine arrived in late September 2008, gravitating toward Arcata and becoming interested in spirituality, environmental activism, and off-the-grid living. Her mother, Anita Walters, would later tell the Eureka Times Standard that she believed Christine was too trusting of the people she met in California. Christine had been keeping regular phone contact with her family during her travels, but after settling in Humboldt, her calls became less frequent. When she did call, she asked her parents for money on several different occasions, with her father obliging these requests. Around November 7, 2008, Christine participated in what's commonly called a tea ceremony in the Arcata area. A private investigator later hired by her family uncovered that the ceremony involved ayahuasca, a powerful hallucinogenic brew made from South American plants. Ayahuasca's effects can include vomiting, diarrhea, and intense hallucinations lasting up to 10 hours. It's also known to trigger severe psychological reactions in predisposed individuals, including mania and depression. Around 20 people reportedly gathered for the ceremony, led by someone claiming to be a shaman. What happened to Christine during or after that ceremony remains a central mystery. She apparently stayed with other participants for several days before leaving on her own the evening of November 11th. The next morning, a couple on Tompkins Hill Road, roughly 20 miles away, found her on their doorstep. She was barely clothed, cold, hungry, and thirsty, her body covered in briar scratches and lacerations. Her feet were nearly raw, as though she'd been running barefoot through the woods for hours. She was confused and visibly terrified. The homeowners called police, and Humboldt County deputies transported Christine to a local hospital. She appeared deeply frightened and said someone was after her, but wouldn't provide specifics about what had happened. She was evasive about her injuries, claiming at one point that she'd simply walked a long way, and spoke of demons who could hear what she was saying and were trying to get her. Drug test came back negative, and because she was a legal adult who didn't wish to be detained, authorities released her. Notably, the hospital has taken serious criticism for not placing her on a psychiatric hold in response to her behavior, though she apparently wasn't deemed a hazard to herself or others. From there, she was taken to the Red Lion Hotel located in Eureka, where she would spend her final known days. From the hotel, Christine called her mother multiple times. She was paranoid and afraid, insisting that people would find her wherever she went. She told her mother she'd been to hell and back, and had seen demons while running through the woods in the days after the ceremony. Anita Walters wanted to fly to California and bring her daughter home personally, but Christine insisted she was a grown-up and could manage on her own. The plan was for her to obtain replacement identification so she could fly home, as she had lost all her documents in the aftermath of the ceremony. On November 14th, around 1 in the afternoon, Christine dropped her hotel keys at the front desk and walked out wearing pajamas and slippers. She went to a print shop in Eureka, where her mother had faxed copies of identification documents that she would need to be replaced. The owner later told investigators Christine appeared nervous and paranoid, looking over her shoulder and trying to hide her papers. She asked directions to the DMV about a mile away, then walked out. Christine Walters has never been seen or heard from again. She was reported missing on November 17, 2008. After her disappearance, Christine's belongings, including money and a large backpack borrowed from a college friend, were found at a spiritual center in Arcata. The center's owner knew Christine and said it wasn't unusual for her to leave things there while walking in the nearby Arcata community forest. However, this potential break in the case went nowhere, and it was never confirmed exactly when she left the backpack at the center. According to some versions of the timeline, this may indicate that she was last seen by someone in one of the communities she drifted in and out of. One of the most widely discussed explanations is that Christine may have experienced a severe psychological episode shortly before her disappearance. She had participated in that tea ceremony days before she was found injured and visibly frightened on a rural doorstep outside Arcata. Ayahuasca contains a powerful hallucinogen, and even though a drug test came back negative at the hospital, her behavior has led many to believe it triggered an acute psychotic break. Proponents of this theory suggest that Christine may have wandered away from civilization, possibly into the dense forests of the region, and succumbed to the elements. Given the rugged, heavily wooded terrain of Humboldt County, a disoriented person could easily become lost or suffer fatal injuries with little chance of being found. Another theory is that Christine may have chose to leave society and adopt a more reclusive, off-grid lifestyle. Before her disappearance, she had shown a growing interest in alternative living, spirituality, and environmental causes. However, this theory has weakened over time, given that there has been absolutely no communication between Christine and her family in almost 20 years. The final theory is that she may have been abducted or otherwise fallen victim to foul play. Notably, individuals undergoing mental health crises are at extremely high risk of meeting with violence under the best circumstances. However, Christine was far away from home, isolated from friends and family, and in a region of the country known for criminality. Because Humboldt County is part of the Emerald Triangle, some theorists argue that Christine could have fallen victim to violence or exploitation after she left the copy center. The area's reputation for high rates of missing persons has fueled speculation that locals are too afraid of the criminal elements in their midst to cooperate with the cops. Some theorists have also noted that the area may be a hotspot for serial predators looking to take advantage of the trusting nature of the free-spirited types who flock there. In the end, Christine's case has gone cold, and ultimately there's no solid evidence in any direction to indicate what actually happened to her. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here with a quick reminder to like and share this video if you're enjoying it and to hit the notification bell. Also, don't forget to check out the Patreon or the YouTube membership to take your support for my channel to the next level. Sometime in the year 1628, a man named David Thompson vanished from the face of the earth. He didn't leave a note. He didn't say goodbye to anyone whose account has survived the centuries. He simply ceased to exist in the historical record, as if the Atlantic winds had swept him clean off the page of colonial New England history. What makes this disappearance so striking isn't just the inherent mystery of it. It's the fact that Thompson was, by nearly every measure, the most important early settler in a region that would eventually become the state of New Hampshire. He'd founded settlements, fed starving pilgrims, and successfully navigated the dangerous politics between English colonists and indigenous peoples. He also successfully secured one of the most significant land grants in early American history. And then, just like that, despite all his accomplishments, he was gone, never to be heard from or seen again. David Thompson was likely born around 1590 and baptized at St. James Church in Clerkenwell, a medieval parish in central London. His parents were of Scottish descent and were descendants of an influential noble family, with his father being a high-ranking clergyman. It's believed that through this Scottish noble connection, his family knew King James VI, who would eventually be crowned James I of England. Through this connection, he came into contact with Sir Fernando Gorges, who had become obsessed with the colonization of New England. He'd been captivated by indigenous Americans who'd been brought to England, and he spent decades promoting settlements across the Atlantic. Thompson became one of his key agents. He was also an apothecary, a pre-modern pharmacist, and he took multiple trips to New England in this capacity, prior to his final journey in 1619. In the spring of 1623, Thompson arrived at the mouth of the Piscataqua River with his wife, his young son John, and a small group of craftsmen and fishermen. They established what became known as Panaway Plantation, located at what is now O'Dorn's Point in Rye, New Hampshire. Under the terms of his indenture with 3 Plymouth investors, Thompson and his crew were expected to run a profitable fishing and trading operation for 5 years. In exchange, they'd receive 6,000 acres of land and an island of Thompson's choosing. Importantly, the charter had been acknowledged by King James himself, bolstering the authority of Thompson's claim to the land substantially. After all, with a legitimate charter from the king, so long as the land was in English possession, there was no higher authority to appeal to. The settlers constructed a fortified stone house, a stockade, and fish processing facilities on nearby Flake Hill. In 1623, the famous Captain Miles Standish arrived from Plymouth Colony, desperate for food to sustain the struggling pilgrims. Thompson provided him with a shipload of salted cod, an act that some historians credit with inspiring what became the Second Thanksgiving at Plymouth. Captain Richard Gorges, the son of Sir Fernando, also visited Panaway and formally deputized Thompson as an officer of the Council for New England. Despite these accomplishments and political connections, the fishing operation wasn't particularly lucrative. Thompson himself expressed doubts about the viability of England's various colonization efforts. By around 1625 or 1626, he'd made the decision to relocate his family southward to a fertile 170-acre island in what would become Boston Harbor. That island still bears his name today, Thompson Island. Thompson's move to the island made him and his family among the very first European settlers of what would eventually become Boston. He arrived 4 years before the Great Puritan Migration of 1630 brought 20,000 English settlers flooding into the Massachusetts Bay Colony. On the island, he established another trading post, likely engaging in fur trade with the people who lived in the surrounding area. Back in New Hampshire, his departure left Panaway Plantation without its leader. It's unclear whether any of his direct employees stayed behind. That said, some families stayed and tried to make do while fishing and trading, but it appears that it was rudderless without Thompson. The settlement faltered, and by around 1630, it appears to have been abandoned entirely. The buildings fell into disrepair, and the exact location of Thompson's original structures has never been confirmed through archaeology. And then came 1628. David Thompson, by then in his mid to late 30s, vanished. The historical record simply goes silent. There's no death certificate, no burial record, no contemporary account of what happened to him. He was alive and running a trading operation, and then he wasn't. Historians have put forward two main theories. The first and most commonly cited is that Thompson drowned in Boston Harbor. Life on a small island in the 17th century was inherently dangerous. The waters were unpredictable, small boats were unreliable, and a man who spent his days fishing and trading would have been on the water constantly. An accidental drowning wouldn't have been unusual, and in such a sparsely populated area, a body lost to the harbor might never have been recovered. The second theory is darker. Some historians have suggested that Thompson was the victim of foul play. He'd spent years serving as a mediator in tense and sometimes hostile conflicts between expanding English colonial groups and indigenous inhabitants. That kind of work made enemies on both sides, with colonial groups seeing him as having gone native, and indigenous groups seeing him as not fully explaining deals. The early colonial period was rife with violence, territorial disputes, and competing interests. A man who positioned himself between those forces was always at risk. There's also the matter of Thompson's widow. She remarried remarkably quickly, wedding Samuel Maverick of nearby Noddle's Island, which is now the site of Boston's Logan Airport. And if you're thinking that Logan isn't located on an island, you're correct. The narrow gap of water was filled in the early 20th century, but I digress. The speed of the remarriage wasn't necessarily suspicious by 17th century standards, as women in the colonies often needed the economic and social protection. But it does suggest that whatever happened to Thompson was understood to be final. There was no period of waiting or hoping for his return. He was simply accepted as gone. In the wake of Thompson's disappearance, the political landscape of New England shifted rapidly. By 1629, Captain John Mason and Sir Fernando Gorges divided the territory that had originally been granted under Thompson's charter. Mason took the southern portion and named it New Hampshire, after the English county of Hampshire. Gorges claimed what became the province of Maine. Thompson's son, John, later had to fight a legal battle to recover ownership of Thompson Island from the town of Dorchester, which had absorbed it. He eventually succeeded, though the island later passed to other hands, and Thompson himself would largely disappear from the history books, as he did in life. On a rainy October day in 1849, a figure was found collapsed outside a Baltimore tavern, delirious, muddied, and dressed in shabby clothes that didn't appear to be his own. Passers-by were stunned to realize the man in the gutter was none other than Edgar Allan Poe, the famed author of eerie tales and poems. He was quickly taken to Washington College Hospital for treatment, but in the 4 days leading up to his death on October 7th, Poe never fully regained consciousness. Instead, he drifted in and out of delirium, reportedly plagued by vivid hallucinations. The night before he died, according to his attending physician, Dr. John Moran, Poe even cried out repeatedly for someone named Reynolds, a mysterious reference that's unexplained. Early that Sunday morning, Edgar Allan Poe died at age 40. The official cause recorded as phrenitis, or swelling of the brain, a vague diagnosis used at the time. In his death, he would create a mystery as perplexing and macabre as one of his own stories. Poe's final journey began with high hopes. He spent the summer of 1849 in Richmond, Virginia, pursuing a new literary venture while recovering from a serious illness. While there, he rekindled a romance with an old sweetheart and planned to remarry, looking toward a brighter future. On September 27th, 1849, Poe departed Richmond, intending to travel north via Baltimore to Philadelphia and then to New York. Yet somewhere along this route, Edgar Allan Poe vanished. He never arrived in Philadelphia, nor did he reach New York as planned. For nearly a week, the writer's whereabouts were completely unknown. It wasn't until October 3rd that he resurfaced in the worst possible state. That day, Poe was found slumped near a polling station in Baltimore, incoherent and in distress. This sudden reappearance, with Poe in dire condition and far off course from his intended journey, only deepened the mystery surrounding his final days. Poe spent his remaining hours confined at the hospital, largely alone and delirious. He was kept in a section reserved for patients found intoxicated, and no visitors were allowed to see him. The only witness to his last moments was Dr. John Moran. He described Poe as slipping in and out of consciousness, rambling in complete delirium. The doctor claimed that Poe's final words were a soft plea for God to help my poor soul, uttered in the early hours of October 7th. However, Moran's credibility has since come under scrutiny. Throughout the years, Moran told inconsistent versions of Poe's last days, leading many to doubt his testimony. With all medical records now lost to history, separating fact from fiction in Poe's final hours is impossible. Despite being well known in his own time, Poe's funeral was a brief and sparsely attended affair. Only a few family members and close friends braved the damp, chilly weather to see him laid to rest. In the aftermath, Poe's reputation suffered almost as much as his body did in his final days. A hostile obituary written by his rival Rufus Griswold maligned Poe as a drunken, depraved madman with numerous false or exaggerated claims. Published under a pseudonym, this libelous piece was widely read and, for a time, accepted as truth. It helped cement the image of Poe dying in disgrace due to alcoholism, a strong stigma at the time that would cling to his legacy for years. Meanwhile, the real cause of Poe's death remained uncertain, and it soon became the subject of intense speculation. For decades, many assumed that Poe simply drank himself to death, as was commonly stated in the media of the time. Poe's collapse and delirium were easily attributed to alcohol by his contemporaries, and his story was used as a case study in alcoholic degeneracy by the temperance movement. Over time, however, the alcohol theory has been widely challenged. Poe did struggle with drinking, but he wasn't the habitual drunk that many imagined. Friends noted that Poe had a severe sensitivity to alcohol. Even one glass of wine could leave him staggering, and that he often abstained for months at a time. In fact, Poe was a member of the Sons of Temperance, and by all accounts stayed sober during his final period in Richmond. Thus, while Poe had periods of excess in his life, modern experts doubt that alcohol alone can account for the peculiar circumstances of his death. That said, it does remain a serious possibility, as he could have relapsed into a severe binge episode. One of the most enduring and bizarre theories is that Poe was the victim of a violent election scam known as cooping. In 19th century Baltimore, gangs would kidnap unsuspecting individuals, force them to drink, and then disguise them to vote multiple times under different names. Such voter fraud was rampant in Baltimore at the time, and tellingly, Poe was found on Election Day outside a polling site notorious for cooping activity. The Cooping theory neatly explains several oddities of Poe's case, such as why he was discovered in an incoherent state and why he was wearing clothes that didn't belong to him. However, others have noted that Poe was a well-known and distinctive-looking figure, and no one reported seeing him brought to any polling stations. Despite some skepticism, Cooping remains one of the most plausible explanations for Poe's untimely fate. Cooping isn't the only foul play scenario that has been suggested, though the others are rather straightforward accounts of him being beat up and robbed by random thugs or goons. Apart from external foul play, a host of medical explanations have been proposed for Poe's baffling end. Over the years, scholars and doctors have retroactively diagnosed Poe with a litany of ailments, including heart disease, diabetes, epilepsy, meningitis, cholera, syphilis, and more. Among the more prominent theories is rabies. In 1996, a medical study of Poe's symptoms concluded that he exhibited classic signs of rabies infection. However, the major problem with this theory is that there's no evidence whatsoever to indicate that he was bit by a rabid animal. Contemporary physicians were familiar with the concept of rabies, and as an interesting aside, it's actually one of the first medical conditions ever documented. In ancient Samaria, a portion of a text was discovered, which warned people that dog bites can spread a fatal disease, but only under certain rare and unusual conditions. Other diagnoses focus on more ordinary illnesses. One hypothesis suggests Poe succumbed to influenza that developed into deadly pneumonia. He had been ill before leaving Richmond and was caught in cold, rainy weather in Baltimore, factors which could have led to a severe fever and delirium. Perhaps the most eerie theory involves a brain tumor. When Poe's body was exhumed in 1875 to be moved to a new grave, witnesses noted a strange calcified mass inside his skull. More than 170 years later, the truth behind Edgar Allan Poe's death still remains elusive, with no single theory proving definitive. In the end, the man who redefined mystery and horror left behind a legacy that no amount of sleuthing is able to crack. Norman Prater was 16 years old when he went missing from his East Dallas neighborhood in January 1973. He was last seen around midnight at an all-night coffee shop where his mother worked, telling her he was heading home. His mom saw Norman with two friends and an older man she didn't recognize shortly before he left. When Norman never arrived home, his family reported him missing on January 14, 1973. The disappearance launched a police investigation, but with no solid leads, it soon went cold. Authorities suspected he might have been abducted or met with foul play, given the mysterious circumstances. For his loved ones, the sudden disappearance was devastating and left them with decades of uncertainty. 6 months later, and 350 miles away, a grim discovery was made. On July 9, 1973, the body of a young white male was found on the side of Highway 35 near Rockport, Texas. He had apparently been the victim of a hit-and-run days earlier. The boy was wearing a straw hat, a white t-shirt, white Levi's jeans, and a distinctive braided blue and red belt, but nothing about his clothing or description led to an identification. Despite extensive efforts by local authorities and media to identify the teenager, including publishing his description in newspapers, no one came forward to claim him. The unidentified boy was estimated to be 15 to 20 years old, around Norman's age. At the time, investigators didn't connect this incident to Norman's case. The Rockport John Doe remained nameless for decades, his true identity a mystery in parallel with Norman. Norman's disappearance eventually became the oldest unsolved missing person case in Dallas police records. His family spent years hoping for answers, never knowing whether he was alive or dead. In the absence of evidence, various theories emerged. One theory even claimed that Norman had fallen prey to Dean Corll, the infamous Candyman serial predator who targeted teenage boys in Texas, but no proof ever supported that idea. Meanwhile, the unidentified Rockport case also lingered without anything in the way of meaningful development. Authorities would occasionally revisit the John Doe file, hoping some new clue or missing person report might finally give the young man a name. Yet for more than 5 decades, both Norman Prater's fate and the Rockport boy's identity remained unknown. A crucial breakthrough came at the end of 2025, and surprisingly, this wasn't due to genetic genealogy. The Aransas County medical examiner, while reviewing old evidence, discovered a clear post-mortem photograph of the 1973 Rockport crash victim in the file. This was an image that had never been widely circulated outside of the local police. That photo was forwarded to the Dallas Police Department's Missing Persons Unit, along with a number of other police departments. Detective Ryan Dalby in Dallas reviewed the image and was struck by how much the unidentified teen resembled the long-missing Norman Prater. Dalby sought a second opinion from a Texas Rangers forensic analyst, who agreed the likeness was strong. Notably, no genetic evidence had ever been logged, meaning that it would have to be old-fashioned detective work that broke the case. Armed with this lead, Detective Dalby located Norman's older brother, Isaac Prater. When Dalby first contacted Isaac about the possible match, the brother said he had been waiting 52 years for a call like this. In late 2025, Dalby met with Isaac in person and showed him the unearthed photo of the unknown victim. Isaac immediately recognized his brother, pointing out familiar facial scars, including one from a dog bite on Norman's lip, and confirmed the match. After 52 years of uncertainty, the pieces finally fell into place, and Dallas police officially concluded that the unidentified teen was Prater, solving 2 cases at once. Norman's identification has also reopened the 1973 hit-and-run investigation in Aransas County. The driver who struck him was never found, so that aspect of the case remains unsolved to this day. It also remains a mystery how a teenager from Dallas ended up nearly 400 miles from home. Investigators suspect he may have hitchhiked south during those missing months, as many young people did in that era. Unfortunately, the exact circumstances of his journey and death may never be fully known, though the investigation remains ongoing. Hey everyone, just a quick reminder to check out the YouTube membership or the Patreon if you want to take your support to the next level. Now with that said, let's get down to business, since there's a lot more mysteries to cover. On a sunny afternoon in 1991, spectators at a hydroplane race on Lake Simcoe were stunned when a large creature suddenly surfaced near a stalled boat, only to slip back under the waves. Many believe this was a rare glimpse of Igopogo, the legendary lake monster rumored to lurk in the depths of Lake Simcoe. This cryptid of Canadian folklore is reputed to dwell in Lake Simcoe, about 40 miles north of Toronto in Ontario, the country's largest province by population. The name itself echoes the much more famous Ogopogo, a lake monster said to inhabit Lake Okanagan. Locals have given the beast other nicknames as well. For example, people around Kempenfelt Bay call it Kempenfelt Kelly, while those in Beaverton know it as Beaverton Bessie. The city of Barrie, on Kempenfelt Bay, even installed a large sea serpent sculpture on its waterfront in 2016 to honor the legend. If you're familiar with my channel, you'll know that this means the creature satisfies my law of lake monsters. Tales of mysterious water creatures in Lake Simcoe actually predate the Igopogo name by hundreds of years. Some indigenous legends spoke of a fearsome water spirit in these waters, and early European settlers also reported strange creatures here. In 1823, for instance, a settler named David Soules claimed to see a huge, long animal thrashing about near the shore. This early account helped set the stage for Igapogo's reputation in local lore. More reports of an unusual lake creature have surfaced sporadically over the years, with the mid to late 20th century being particularly rich in sightings. In 1952, near Georgina Island, 4 people, including First Nations Chief Wellington Charles, saw something bizarre in the water. Charles described a beast with a neck like a stovepipe and a dog-like face, startling features to encounter in a lake. Another prominent report came on July 22, 1963, when witnesses observed a dark, snake-like creature up to 60 or 70 feet long, sporting several fins along its back. This 1963 incident reinforced the idea that something unexplained was lurking below Lake Simcoe's surface. A photograph of Igapogo, allegedly taken in 1975, shows 2 dark humps in Lake Simcoe. This blurry image, published by a local newspaper in 1976, is often cited as evidence of the monster. And if you're just listening, this is the image of the creature I've had up for this entire segment, so you may want to take a look and see what you think of it. In June 1983, a sonar operator detected a massive moving object with a long neck underwater, though some argued it was just a false reading from a school of fish. The most famous evidence is a videotape from 1991. During a boat race that summer, an amateur video captured a large animal rising out of Lake Simcoe. A zoologist who reviewed the footage estimated the creature to be about 9 to 12 feet long with flipper-like limbs. The video, which is now lost media, raised the creature's profile considerably, even if the video itself was never made widely available. Eyewitness descriptions of Igapogo have varied widely, and essentially no 2 reports are exactly alike. However, unlike the classic Loch Ness-type plesiosaur image, Igapogo's brownish-gray coloration and canine-shaped head give it a distinctly mammalian appearance. These features have led some to speculate that the cryptid might be an unknown aquatic mammal, an aquatic canine of sorts. And this description of a watery dog has naturally led scientists and skeptics to lean toward more down-to-earth explanations. Lake Simcoe is connected via waterways to the Great Lakes, so some have speculated a stray seal could have swam in using that connection. However, cryptozoologists have pointed out that seals only end up in the Great Lakes accidentally, and this would be a massive journey for such an animal. The mystery of Igapogo has inspired a few earnest investigations. In 2005, investigators, backed by a Discovery Channel science show and Barrie's tourism department, scanned Kempenfelt Bay with sonar and underwater cameras. This attempt found no signs whatsoever of any unknown creature lurking in the bay. In the 1980s, a cryptozoologist had also scoured the lake with similar results, leading him to suspect that the animal may have died off or just moved on. Lack of hard evidence notwithstanding, the Igapogo legend persists to this day. Some hold out hope that an undiscovered creature truly lurks beneath Lake Simcoe's waves, hiding in the depths. On a chilly Christmas night in 2007, the area outside of Phoenix, Arizona Mall played host to an unfathomable act of cruelty. A man was seen engulfed in flames outside a Subway restaurant as horrified bystanders rushed to call 911. That man was 36-year-old Aaron Taylor, a familiar homeless figure in the area who had just become the victim of a gruesome and senseless crime. Investigators are convinced they know who's responsible, but a lack of hard evidence and the silence of witnesses have kept the perpetrators out of the reach of justice. Aaron Taylor wasn't an anonymous drifter to those who worked near Paradise Valley Mall in Phoenix. Employees at the mall's eateries and shops knew him as a polite, friendly presence who often camped near the Subway restaurant on East Cactus Road. Aaron had come to Arizona from Oregon years earlier, and by all accounts was a gentle, considerate person who had a rough lot in life. Tragically, Aaron's final months were marked by torment. He had become the target of a group of local young men who took pleasure in bullying him as he tried to go about his life. Witnesses later told police that a trio of teens and young adults had been harassing Aaron for weeks before his death. These individuals lived in a nearby apartment complex, and they treated Aaron as a source of cruel entertainment. In the latter half of 2007, people saw Aaron being subjected to degrading quote-unquote pranks. In one instance, the criminals reportedly duct-taped Aaron to a bench in the mall courtyard, leaving him restrained and humiliated. On another occasion, they dragged him and threw him into a fountain for their amusement. A mall security guard even recalled seeing these men pouring liquids on Aaron and pushing him around in the months before the slaying. It was a pattern that grew increasingly violent over time, escalating with little intervention from bystanders or authorities. In Aaron's case, this pattern was a dire warning sign of the horror to come. While the harassment was known and widely witnessed, there was no sustained effort that successfully stopped the assaults. On the evening of December 25, 2007, while many families celebrated in warmth, Aaron Taylor settled in to sleep on his usual bench. It was a holiday evening like many others for him, cold and quiet, with a few passers-by and the glow of neon from nearby shops. Sometime that night, the same group who had been tormenting him decided to pay Aaron a visit. According to witness accounts pieced together later, 3 males approached Aaron in the courtyard as he rested. They brought drinks and snacks, perhaps trying to pretend they were in the Christmas spirit, or perhaps simply to toy with him. Several people saw the group chatting and sharing drinks with Aaron, almost as if they were hanging out casually. In fact, police would later find an assortment of items left behind: a half-empty bottle of whiskey, an unopened can of beer, and even a bag of Cheetos. It seemed the men were socializing with Aaron at first, perhaps lulling him into a sense of security. It turned out that this was just the setup for something unthinkably cruel. As darkness fell, what had appeared to be a quote-unquote friendly encounter turned into one of the most disturbing acts I've ever covered on this channel. Witnesses reported a horrifying sight. The young men began flicking lit matches at Aaron's long beard. When this sick game stopped being entertaining, they took things one step further. They doused Aaron in some sort of flammable liquid. Around 7 that night, a bystander saw flames erupting from the bench area and called 911 in alarm. In a matter of moments, Aaron was completely engulfed in fire. The attackers scattered, reportedly running off back toward their apartment, leaving Aaron to his horrific fate. The scene was nothing short of a nightmare. Mall security and a nearby convenience store clerk sprinted over and desperately tried to save Aaron, using their jackets to smother the flames that were consuming him. These good Samaritans fought frantically for several minutes, but the fire was too intense due to the flammable liquid Aaron had been doused with. When Phoenix Fire Department paramedics arrived, they found a harrowing sight: Aaron's body straddling the bench, still on fire. First responders extinguished the flames and rushed to perform CPR. They raced Aaron to the Maricopa County burn unit, but the injuries were catastrophic. He was officially pronounced dead shortly after arrival at the hospital. Later, the medical examiner's report confirmed the most chilling detail. Aaron had been alive throughout most of the ordeal, evidenced by soot in his airways from breathing in the smoke and flames. Aaron had been lit on fire and been forced to endure unimaginable horrors while fully conscious, for the amusement of 3 disturbed individuals who remain free. In the immediate aftermath, Phoenix police launched a full investigation, but they faced serious challenges from the start. The very act of attempting to save Aaron's life unfortunately destroyed much of the physical evidence at the scene. Firefighters had no choice but to douse the flames with water and foam, which inadvertently washed away potential forensic clues. Any traces like accelerant residue, blood, or fingerprints that might have been on Aaron's clothing or the bench were largely obliterated in the process of extinguishing the fire. Notably, while they recovered evidence, most of these items had been compromised by a mixture of heat, water, and foam. For instance, matchsticks that may have been used to ignite Aaron were too fire damaged to yield any DNA or fingerprints. Investigators scoured the area for surveillance footage, but frustratingly, none of the nearby shop's security cameras captured the secluded spot where it happened. The crime had effectively occurred in a blind spot with little forensic evidence. Eyewitness testimony became the crucial pillar of the investigation, since the physical evidence was lacking. And indeed, multiple people had seen parts of the incident or the events leading up to it. Several witnesses told police about the group of young men seen hanging around Aaron that night, providing descriptions of their actions. One witness specifically reported seeing the men laughing and flicking matches at Aaron shortly before the fire erupted. In the aftermath, someone came forward saying that one of the young men actually bragged afterward about the incident. All of these accounts painted a consistent and damning picture pointing to the same perpetrators. Crucially, people also noted that these were the same individuals who had been harassing Aaron for weeks prior. In the eyes of the Phoenix police, there was little mystery about who committed this sick act. The pattern of escalating attacks and eyewitness placements all pointed to those three young men as the culprits. While the police may have identified the likely perpetrators early on, turning that suspicion into an arrest proved daunting. A huge obstacle was the lack of cooperative witnesses willing to testify in court. Some bystanders who initially spoke to police grew hesitant to get further involved. It's been speculated that there may have been witness intimidation involved. When detectives brought in the three suspects for questioning, they hit a wall of silence. All three denied involvement, and as soon as police started pressing them with the witness accounts, the suspects lawyered up. According to the cops, the suspects' parents moved quickly to hire attorneys for their sons and advised them not to cooperate with investigators. With no confessions, no surveillance footage, no DNA, and only reluctant witnesses, the case stalled out. Prosecutors determined there just wasn't enough admissible evidence to confidently charge the suspects, even though the detectives strongly believed they had the right people. The prosecution only has one chance to pursue the case, so the idea that they would have taken it to trial without cooperative witnesses made the chances of success minimal. Also, of course, the lack of any usable forensic evidence posed a huge problem, especially since the witnesses stopped cooperating. The biggest mystery here isn't who did it, but rather how to finally hold the culprits accountable. Over the years, Phoenix detectives have revisited the case multiple times, hoping new evidence might surface, but as yet nothing has. In the end, it appears that the best chance for justice for Aaron Taylor will be if one of the men involved in the attack turns on the other two. Another potential possibility is if some very significantly degraded DNA can be reanalyzed to form a DNA profile. Even if only one individual can be tied to the crime, that's likely all that's needed. Using this method, the authorities may be able to put the full weight of the state on one individual and fully crack the case. Making a deal with one of the men may simply be the only way to realistically bring the other two to justice. Anyway, this case makes me absolutely sick. Hopefully these guys are caught and Aaron gets the justice he deserves. If you'd stepped into a refined English drawing room in 1800, you'd likely have encountered a sight that seemed to defy the very laws of biological physics. Hanging prominently within a heavy, gilded frame, A creature that was supposedly a pig or sheep or a cow didn't look like a living animal at all, but rather like a breathing brick of meat. Its body was rendered as a perfect rectangle, a sharp-edged block of muscle and fat so massive that the four spindly legs supporting it looked as if they might snap at any moment. These oat-stuffed animals weren't the result of an artistic blunder or a painter who'd never visited a farm. Instead, they were carefully constructed status symbols, the visual manifestos of an agricultural revolution that was reshaping the British landscape. This era of rectangular livestock painting was a profound display of power, wealth, and a radical new way of conceptualizing the natural world as something to be engineered for profit. Also, if you're one of those people who tends to just listen to my videos, there's a lot of interesting art from the time period here that you're going to want to see. The late 18th and early 19th centuries were a period of frantic change for Britain. As the Industrial Revolution shifted into high gear, the population of urban centers exploded, and all those factory workers needed a reliable source of food. This created a massive, lucrative market for meat, milk, and tallow. In response, a new class of landowner emerged, known as the improvers. These weren't traditional farmers who were content with the methods of their ancestors. They were scientific tinkerers who viewed livestock as biological machines that could be refined for maximum output. They believed that through rigorous intervention and selective breeding, they could create animals that grew faster and fatter than anything nature had originally intended. To these men, a perfectly square cow was tangible proof that they'd mastered the science of breeding and had successfully bent the biological world to their will. This obsession with size was framed as much more than just a way to generate wealth. It was presented to the public as a profound patriotic duty. With the nation frequently engaged in costly conflicts and the domestic population rising, food security was a major political concern. Elite farmers argued that by developing these gargantuan meat mountains, they were providing a vital service to the entire country. They claimed that their experiments in creating massive cattle would eventually trickle down to smaller, more modest farmers. This in turn would lead to a more productive agricultural system that would benefit everyone from the monarchy to the common laborer. Some animals were even given names like Patriot to emphasize this connection between a farmer's breeding success and his devotion to the British crown. When an artist captured a cow as a perfect rectangle, they were painting a portrait of a national hero, a fleshy pillar of British prosperity and industrial progress. There was a very cold, calculated economic reason for the preference for such extreme fatness. In a world before electric lights and modern synthetic lubricants, animal fat, specifically tallow, was a critical industrial resource. It was used to produce the candles that lit every home and provided the essential grease for the heavy machinery that powered the nation's factories. It's estimated that the fat from a single prize-winning animal could sometimes be worth significantly more than the meat itself. Breeders were incentivized to produce animals that could pack on as much fat as possible, and the rectangular shape was considered the most efficient container for that weight. A square silhouette signaled that the animal was carrying the maximum amount of high-value tallow along its back and sides. The geometry was a visual code for the financial value of truly industrial livestock. The most famous figure in this era of agricultural spectacle was undoubtedly the Durham ox. Born in 1796 and bred by the Colling brothers, this bull became a genuine national celebrity. Eventually purchased by a traveling showman named John Day, the ox was taken on an epic tour across England and Scotland that lasted for 5 years. Day even had a custom-made carriage built to move the massive animal, which was reported to weigh nearly 3,000 pounds. Everywhere they went, Crowds of people paid for the privilege of seeing this monstrous creature in person. The ox's image was reproduced in thousands of prints and engravings, which were sold as souvenirs. These images were so popular that they were even used as patterns for dinner plates. This in turn allowed families to literally eat their meals off the likeness of the greatest representative of the world's most famous beef producer. Not to be outdone, the craven heifer became another legendary figure in the early 1800s. Born in 1807 on a grand estate in Yorkshire, she was fed relentlessly until she reached record-breaking proportions. She remains the largest cow ever shown in England, weighing over 4,000 pounds. Like the Durham ox, she was taken on tour, a journey that was so slow and difficult, it took 73 days just to travel from Wakefield to London. She was so wide that her owners had to build a special doorway for her cowshed that was twice the normal size just so she could get in and out. These celebrity animals were subjected to a strange life of extreme pampering, mixed with the grueling physical strain of constant travel and public exhibition. The artists who created these iconic paintings were often provincial or itinerant specialists who moved from one grand estate to another. These artists who were commissioned to put these meat castles to canvas weren't looking for the approval of high-minded art critics in London or Paris. They were working for practical-minded landowners who wanted an accurate, if idealized, record of their achievements. These painters were effectively creating trophies that their owners could hang on their walls to announce their success to any visitor. The influence of these images wasn't confined to the walls of manor houses. Thanks to new printing technologies, the images of celebrity animals entered the homes of the growing middle class. Pottery manufacturers began producing vast quantities of dinnerware featuring these livestock portraits. Owning a platter with the image of a famous meat rectangle was a way for a family to show that they were modern, patriotic, and aligned with the ideals of progress. The dining table became a place where status was displayed not just by the food being served, but by the very dishes it was served on. This mass distribution helped to cement the rectangular aesthetic as a defining visual symbol of the era, making the square cow a recognizable icon across the entire country. But unfortunately, there's a very dark side to this pursuit of geometric perfection that was often overlooked in the celebratory atmosphere of the time. The extreme selective breeding and intensive feeding required to create these massive animals took a devastating toll on their health. These so-called improved creatures were often so heavy that they could barely move, their delicate legs struggling under the weight of bodies that had been engineered for sheer volume. The short lifespans of animals like the Durham ox and the craven heifer were a direct result of the physiological strain their bodies were put under. For the breeders, these were the necessary sacrifices in the name of progress and national food security. The paintings capture a moment of triumph for biological engineering, but they also record a period of profound suffering that was justified by the economic needs of the time. As the 19th century wore on, the fashion for rectangular livestock began to fade. The science of agriculture became more refined, and breeders started to prioritize traits like efficiency and meat quality over sheer visible bulk. At the same time, the art world moved toward a more naturalistic style, and the portraits of itinerant painters were replaced by more realistic depictions of rural life.